All right, just before we do a review of what the market was last week, let's take a quick look again at the global oil market as U.S. crude prices plunged in the morning of Asian trading as traders continued to fret over a slump in demand due to coronavirus pandemic, with one analyst describing the situation stateside as quite dire. Prices on the May contract for West Texas Intermediate crude futures tanked by nearly 19% to $14.84 per barrel. Earlier in the day, WTI had fallen to $14.47 per barrel, its lowest level since mid-March 1999 when it traded for as low as $14.40 per barrel. Meanwhile, international benchmark Brent crude futures edged 2.42% lower to $27.40 per barrel. The coronavirus pandemic has dealt a severe blow to economic activity around the globe and sapped demand for energy, while OPEC and its oil-producing allies finalized a historic agreement earlier this month to cut production by 9.7 million barrels per day. The International Energy Agency has warned that the cuts may not be enough to offset a severe plunge in oil demand. With demand at near paralysis, oil and fuel tanks around the world are close to brimming. And the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, the African Union, and international partners have called for the safeguarding of food security in Nigeria and other African countries amid the coronavirus crisis. According to the agencies, the food and agriculture system is an essential service that must continue to operate during the period of lockdown, emergency, curfew, and other containment measures. In a joint declaration on Friday by the FAO, the parties expressed commitment to supporting access to food and nutrition for Africa's most vulnerable. They pledged to provide Africans with social safety nets and minimizing disruptions to the safe movement and transport of people. The agency is also committed to the transport and marketing of goods and services, as well as keeping borders open on the continent for food and agriculture trade. The agency's Director General says quick and strategic actions were needed to lessen the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on food security in Nigeria. He expressed support for measures that will not lead to disruptions in food supply chains, stressing that these must be kept alive. Okay, let's look at last week's trading at the markets, the equities markets, and of course, Temple Ashaju joins us now. Temple, good morning.
Money makes a lot of people smile, actually. That's why you were smiling there. So we got a whole lot of liquidity in the system for the greater part of last week. And that's where a lot of investors, traders, treasurers, dealers were able to distribute these funds across board. And that's how we arrived at a 7.19% gain on the index of the Nigerian Stock Exchange last week alone, Monday through to Friday, even though we know that generally it's more of remote trading that we've been seeing across board. And of course, on the equity side of things, this was what we recorded. We hadn't seen this level in a long time. I think the last that we saw was on the 10th of February when the market moved by as much as this percentage or this merging in the market. And that contributed some 801 billion naira to the equity capitalization of the markets, which eventually brought us closer to around 12 trillion naira, even though in the last 7 weeks, the market has lost over 2 trillion naira in total as a whole. And of course, if you look at the activity level, foreign activity level was a little bit mild compared to what we did in the preceding session. That's the preceding week. We got 1.49 billion units of shares actually traded for at the greater part of last week. And of course, it was for this value, 12.89 billion naira. Look at the deals was higher, 982 was what we actually recorded for last week only. Now look at the performance of the major sectors. We got banking sector up by some 4.73%, thanks to Zenith Bank, which is up by 7%. And of course, you had Guarantee Trust Bank, which is up by more than 10% last week. Stanbic IBTC also contributed some volume to this level of transaction that gave us this picture of the banking segment of the market. But if you look at the major segments as a whole, the top gainer in terms of sectoral performance was the consumer goods segment of the market, 15.57% gains. And of course, we know that Nestle matched its green color on this green that we have here of the sectoral performance. It was up significantly by some 16.5% week on week. We also saw the Nigerian breweries was up by some 45% week on week. And of course, Dangote Sugar was also very, very positive and contributed to what we had here. Industrial goods segment of the market, thanks to Dangote Cement, after it raised and settled its 100 billion naira bonds issue last week. The settlement was on Friday. We saw that eventually a lot of investors came back to the equity space of Dangote Cement and put their funds on it. It contributed some 16.2% to what we have here. And of course, Boa Cement was able to recover a little bit, especially on Friday, and was able to contribute some 3.4% to what we have here. We didn't get so much of good from WAPCO, which has actually been lifting this segment of the market lately. Insurance segment of the markets, Cornerstone Insurance and WAPIC Insurance were the key gainers and contributed these marginal gains to what we have here. While Cornwell PLC, which was also able to record some 32.9%, was able to contribute more to the oil and gas space as it settled at 147 basis points higher than what it did in the preceding session, which was lifted that session by O&O PLC. And then moving on to the unlisted security side of the market, we didn't have any change. It was intact. We got 698.22 psychological position. And of course, possibly if we have the level of transactions that we had last week, we could cost back to 700 psychological mark with what we've seen in this space. But basically, volume of transaction was up by some 5%. Last week on week was 5% up, and we saw some 23 to 24% rise in the value of the transaction. Basically, deals was just 9. And of course, the major gainers or contributors to all of these transactions, number one was CSCS, which did some 2.9 million units of its shares. And we know that Niger Delta Exploration Production Company contributed to this as well. WAMCO also contributed some gains to all of this transaction, as well as even VFD Group that had just one deal. Talking about the debt side of the market, FGM bonds, all the segments of this market was very positive, in spite of the fact that yields had to now go down. And of course, it was actually up. We saw decline by 31 basis points in this space. And if you look at the cold shoulder that investors continue to give to the NTB space, in spite of the fact that there was a lot of system liquidity, it was down by 23 basis points. And for the OMO side of the market, we saw a 1.1% decline in yields to 11.26%.
Thank you, Temple. Well, let's hope that we'll continue to smile at the end of today's trading.
We will. We certainly will.
Right. Okay. We'll do an opening call to London as well as the debt and currency market after the break. Do stay with us.